I'm Hannah from Good Life Permaculture. We're based on Muwinina country in Hobart, Australia. Okay, we're on week 3 of our crisis gardening series. In this time of COVID-19, you might be having a little bit of time on your hands at home. So this week we're going to teach you about food waste composting. We've been teaching you previously about how to grow your food, but to grow that food you need to feed the soil. It's really all about the soil, you'll eventually figure out yourself. So today I'm going to step you through 3 ways you can compost your food waste at home and turn that what can be a big problem into a big fat solution for your food garden. Come with me, let's get started. Lots of people will have one of these in their backyard. Some of you might already be using it really well. Awesome, keep doing that. Some of you might just be looking at it going, what the hell am I meant to be doing with this thing-o? Some of you might have had a crack at it and gone, holy macaroni, composting is so stinky, that's not for me. Well, I've got news for you. If your compost bin stinks, it's actually not compost. It's just a gross, stinky pile of most likely just food waste. Nothing to do with compost. Like good compost smells like that, okay? So stay with me, I'm going to show you how. But first, the hot tip with these bins is to make sure you can rodent proof them. You don't want your compost bin to become this amazing haven of rodent heaven land, which is like hell land for you. So what we do, we get a bit of vermin mesh, also called Avery mesh. We cut a big circle, the same size or a bit bigger than the compost bin bottom. And you'll see here, all we do is fold it over the existing lip of the compost bin. So it's really easy to take on and off. Usually we just keep it on until we're ready to harvest the compost. And that is a hot tip, which will get rid of all rodents. Touch wood. I know there's some weird hardcore rodents out there, but this has gotten rid of all rodents in our compost bin. So that's tip number 1. Okay, but back to food waste composting. It's really, really important that you get what we call the carbon and nitrogen ratio nice and balanced for your compost bin. Otherwise, that's where you can get a really bad smell, what we call anaerobic, which means gross and stinky. That means that you've got too much nitrogen stuff in there, which basically means too much food waste. You need to have dry, brown stuff usually to balance out all that food waste. So, just briefly, some carbon materials we've got here. We've got some damp straw. I've got some dry sawdust here from a building project we're doing. Of course, that timber has no glues or chemicals in there, so it's nice, just hardwood. Other common carbon materials would be shredded office paper or brown cardboard that you can rip up and scrunch up. We never use glossy magazines because it's got too much ink in there. But look around your house or your garden or your property, you'll have a huge amount of carbon materials freely available to you. Another common one is dry brown leaves. And right now in the southern hemisphere, we're coming into autumn, or we're in mid-autumn. So there's lots of leaves around that you could use from your home or your streetscape. So get them. Some common nitrogen materials, which you might have in your home. Some green grass clippings from freshly mowed lawn. You could also use coffee grinds, which is, carbon nitrogen quite balanced. Some animal manures. We never put in domestic pet poo in here, so cats and dogs, because there's some risk of contamination from any medication they're on, or cats might have what we call Toxoplasma gondii, which we just don't want in our food composting system. You can compost them separately in their own contained worm farm. We can talk about that later, maybe. And of course, the main food nitrogen ingredient is food waste. And come closer. Look what I've got in here. I've got some tea leaves, some coffees in there. I've got lots of bread husks, bread from my daughter who never eats her crusts. I've got lots of cut up apples from when I was dehydrating some apples. Everything goes in there. The key thing here is that I've got garlic and onion in there. I've got carrot tops. The most important thing to remember is that you can pretty much compost anything and everything that was once alive. Okay? Anything can go into a compost system. That includes cooking oils or plate scrapings from dinner or breakfast. It also includes small bits of meat in here. Keeping in mind it's a slow, cold compost system. So when I say small bits of meat, it is small bits of meat. Don't go chucking in big bones in here. They'll just sit there forever. Okay, we'll talk about that at a different time. So all my food scraps in here, what you also need to know is that they're cut into small bits, or the bread crusts, that will break down really quickly. I would never put in a whole apple or a whole pumpkin in here. It will just sit there for ages. So when I'm in the kitchen, I take an extra like 10 seconds and just chop it up before I put it into my scrap bin. It means it will compost a lot more quickly. Okay, that's important. So the ingredients we've got some nitrogen, some grass clippings and mixed food waste. We've got some straw and sawdust. We've got some water here, and the other fourth ingredient that we need to have in our compost bin is air. So that's the 4 universal compost ingredients that every single compost system will have. You just might configure it slightly differently. So let's make a compost pile now. We'll start one in our compost bin. When you look at a compost textbook, there will be lots of impressive charts and numbers that will overwhelm and probably confuse you. They'll say things like your carbon and nitrogen ratio has to be 25:1, and it'll be, you know, facts and figures everywhere. Like, I don't know what that means. Like, fair enough. All they're trying to say is don't make it gross and stinky. When it comes to your compost bin, you're obviously not going to be filling it up straight away. It's a slow, gradual process. You'll come out here every day or 5 once your actual kitchen scrap bin is full. So it's a slow, gradual process. We put in, I'm going to start the first few layers with you to show you. I always start with a carbon layer, and I put that in the very bottom, shake it down, make sure it's nice and fluffy because I want the air to get in there. And I put a carbon layer in the bottom so it can absorb any liquids that will naturally come down to the bottom. So I make sure it's evenly spaced around. Have a quick look if you can. And while I'm there, I'll just straight away get water in there. I water it in after every carbon layer to make sure that's nice and evenly distributed throughout the whole bin. My next layer is a nitrogen layer, and a rough guide. So while the textbooks say 25:1 of carbon to nitrogen ratio, over many years of composting, I found what that can translate to is roughly 50-50 in volume. So 50% of volume of straw to 50% of volume of my next nitrogen layer, yeah, roughly. And I'm going to use some fresh grass clippings because I happen to have just mowed some of our grass. So I just put a little bit in, but stay there, because what I'm going to show you is when you're making a whole layer, like I'm doing now, the carbon layer is roughly, I've got big hands, but roughly 1 hand's depth, and the nitrogen layer is roughly 1 pinky finger's depth, yeah? So 1 pinky of nitrogen to 1 hand of carbon, knowing that that carbon will sink as it put more weight on top of it, okay? So I put a grass layer on top of my carbon layer, and some people will refer to lasagnas, yeah? So we're making a lasagna compost pile here. Then my next, all that means is I'm going to repeat the carbon to nitrogen, and on we go. So I'm going to put in a little bit of sawdust here. I haven't got enough for a thick layer, so I'm going to top that up with some more straw and get to the point that you've all been waiting for, like, yeah, but what about the food waste? Bear with me. I'm just getting a little bit of volume in here. So I'm going to add a bit more water, and then, because it's really rare, you're going to have heaps and heaps of food waste to fill in a whole layer of your compost bin. You'll just have this one small bucket. It's not enough to actually do one solid layer. So just coming back to that principle of 50-50, if I put in this much food waste, I'm going to put in the same amount of carbon, making sure that the food waste is covered. So I'm going to tip this in now. And I am spreading it out. I don't just want to have one big pile on one side. I am spreading that out evenly, but it's not a solid layer of food scraps. If I was to leave it like that, it would become a magnet for flies, and they'd just be all over the place, and it gets a bit, it's nothing really bad, but it's just not very pleasant for you. So we always cover any food scraps with a carbon layer. We've got straw today, so that's what I'll be using. And I'm just putting in, you know, if you have to, you can keep the same bucket and go, oh, how much straw should I put in? That's how much straw you should put in. And the main thing is that you want to cover all the food scraps so nothing can be seen. That means the flies aren't coming, and it means there's no smell that's going to come wafting around as well. I might give it a little bit of a watering, but that's it. That's all you have to do. If you find it's not doing anything, it's not composting, it's not breaking down, it might be too dry, so add some more water. You might want to add it, you can sometimes add some animal manures. So if you happen to have chickens or sheep or cows or goats like we do here, you might put some of those in. Other people put in blood and bone as well, just to kick it along. Other people put in compost worms as well, which we'll talk about shortly. But that's it. It's not rocket science. It's simply around carbon and nitrogen balancing. You can do this. This is okay. So we keep our lid on so we can moderate the water inputs, mainly rain, and that's it. I think that we're going to keep it there. We're going to leave it there, keep it simple. There's a million other things we can talk about compost. People do PhDs on compost, but we're not going to do that today. So I'm going to take you to another way of doing food waste composting now. Over here, I'm going to introduce you to our beautiful worm farm. This worm farm is hiding underneath my bottom right now. We built it as a seat so we can sit here and enjoy our garden and our beautiful goats and chickens. But if I open this up, it's actually a great lid. And underneath here is a bathtub that we found on our property when we came here. And this is our worm farm. So I'm going to take everything off so you can see it. You can see over here we're feeding all our fresh food over here. Well, over here we're letting it rest and mature. Just a few things around worms. When I say compost worms, I definitely don't mean the common earthworm that you might see cruising around your lawn or your garden. Those common earthworms hate a nitrogen-rich environment, which is what a worm farm is. So we would never harvest them and put them into a worm farm because they will die. When we talk about a compost worm, there's two common types that we have here in Australia, and they are the red wriggler and the tiger worm. And so you actually have to source them in particular for your worm farm. Those types of worms love cruising around really rich environments of 100% food waste or animal manure like cow poo, love coffee grinds. They'll just have the best time and they'll prolifically multiply quickly. Come down here, I'm going to show you some. So I'm going to dig down underneath all these food scraps. Oh, there you go. Look at these beauties. So you can see they're quite skinny. These are red wrigglers, so you can see that the colour is noticeably red, and they're having a really happy time there. Hello, little people, little wormies. So these are the worms that we're breeding here specifically for breaking down our food scraps. Now let's have a look at some of these food scraps we've got here. Some are you can see eggshells. You can see a lot of eggshells, a lot of silver beet things here too, and a bit of paper as well. So you can still put in paper, no worries. We've got some old bags here. They'll help break down things which are a bit of a no-no. This corn cob should have been chopped up a bit more, yeah? If you imagine a worm's mouth, it's going to be pretty small. They're not going to be able to break down things like that quickly. Eggshells you can see a lot of, and if you come over here you'll see, even though this is maturing so beautifully, the eggshells are really noticeably still there. Honestly, it's not a problem really. You can sieve those out if you want to, but you can also take a bit more time in the kitchen to grind them up in a mortar and pestle or in a coffee grinder whizzer thingo, and that will just become a dust amongst it. Okay, so the other things that you need to know is that, again, we always cover this. So I have some cardboard that we use here. So we just make sure whenever we feed it, we cover it with cardboard. And this is a bit dry now, so I would usually keep that damp. I just water it down with the watering can. That moderates all the temperature there. Make sure it doesn't get too hot or too cold. Make sure that there's no flies cruising around and landing on the food all the time as well, which is great. So keep that covered. And the great thing about this is also it's rodent proof, so rodents can't chew through the sides and get in there. Other fantastic thing about using a bath is that we use the drainage hole to catch all the liquid. So come over around here, that's the plug hole down there. We just have a little bucket, and this is what we call worm wee, and it's obviously incredibly dark brown. It smells like nothing really, so it's not a stinky thing at all. We use this as a garden fertilizer for our food crops. It's brilliant, which is another key thing why you would have a key reason why you'd have compost worms. It's great fertility. We will dilute this worm wee until it's the colour of a weak tea, so light brown, And then what we do, we fertigate our food crops. So we'll pop it in a watering can and just sprinkle it over. Fertigating means that you're irrigating and fertilising at the same time. So doubling up the function there, which is really clever. So thank you, worms. But can everyone go and build a big bathtub seat complex worm farm like this? No, and we get that. There's heaps of smaller worm farms you can buy from a nursery or different types of places. But we're all about making things ourselves and finding otherwise abandoned things that could be transformed into new productive stuff. So if you come over here, I'm going to show how you can make a really simple worm farm for a garden bed or a raised garden bed as well. So pop over here. This is what we call a worm tower. A worm tower can be made from lots of different things, including an old bucket which was already falling apart. So what we do, we drill holes into the bottom of it and the side of it as well. And the size of the holes are as big as it needs to be for a worm to squeeze through, yeah? So that's how big you can make them. They could be a bit bigger, but the reason why we use a bucket is because rodents can't dig in and underneath it. It keeps coming back to those rodents, doesn't it? So we're really conscious that when you start doing food waste composting, a key thing that can go wrong is that you attract every single rat and mouse in the neighbourhood to your garden, which is not okay. So we're constantly thinking about how can we make sure that never even becomes an issue. So we've drilled holes around here, and I've dug it into a bit of a garden bed here, which is amongst our broader orchard. I've just dug it in so I cover in all the holes I've dug on the side, and I start to backfill it straight away with a bit of soil. This could be in your vegetable bed though, or in a raised garden bed. They work really well with what's called a wicking bed, which is a fully enclosed raised bed, and it provides fertility for where it's needed most, right next to the carrot root or the tomato plant. So I've just put a bit of straw and a bit of soil in there. Other things that you could put in there is mature compost that you already have, or some other quality garden soil. So use what you have available. You just need a bit of a neutral layer for the worms to be added to. And this little bucket, I've got some compost worms I've harvested, so you can see them there, ready to go. Lovely, aren't they beautiful? They're so beautiful. So I pop them straight down, and straight away I can add in my food scraps. So I've got some, oh look, this is where I've done the right thing. I've chopped my corn cobs up nice and small. That's what you want. I've chopped up my apple nice and small. So I've got some paper in there, that's good too. That can go straight in. So I've got some cardboard in there, no worries. And I added a little bit of straw on top, which is my carbon layer, just to make sure that no flies are attracted to. It's quite damp in there already too, but if I needed to, I could water that in to make sure there's nice moisture content throughout. Obviously, I've almost filled my bucket already, so you can use bigger buckets as well. But this is a nice compact solution where you can fit into small spaces, and you pop a lid straight on top to moderate rain and to keep any rodents out as well. Okay, so composting is really important. It is an incredible solution to a big local and global problem. Did you know that in Australia, I think it was around 40% of landfill sites is pure food waste. That's on top of any green waste stuff in there as well. When it's in landfill, it's compressed down with big machinery. It becomes incredibly compacted, mixed in with different plastics, and it becomes what we call anaerobic, which means gross and stinky, and releases methane gas, which is hugely damaging to our atmosphere. We really don't want it in there. Instead, we can stop that becoming a problem in our own kitchen gardens and turn those kitchen scraps into garden gold, so that you, your family, can have an incredibly productive and healthy foodscape where you live. There are 1,000,001 more ways to compost your food scraps. This is only 3, but there's so many different resources out there, and I'll put lots of links below this little video that you can follow up as well. The main thing you do is that you actually start, that you do it, and that you get addicted to it. It's so satisfying when you can do a little bit of your own magic, turn those banana scraps and those pumpkin peels into incredible, beautiful brown compost that you can grow amazing food from. So I wish you all the best, and I look forward to you sending me lots of photos of your amazing compost. Cheers!